There was a picture, a woman in a coat moving out of the frame, or with her back to the camera, a child also. The woman is pushing a baby carriage. There is nothing else. Only some trees and some playground equipment in the distance. All around the ground is covered with leaves. It is a fugitive picture. And there was a small white cardboard box in my mother's night table drawer. In it were a tiny pair of felt shoes and a little brush that had soft bristles and a sweet smell. A poem titled A Fugitive Photograph from the collection of tonight's guest, Ditta Baron Hoeber. Book is titled Without You. Good evening. My name is Charles Carr, and welcome to Philly Loves Poetry, a collaboration between the Moonstone Art Center of Philadelphia and PhillyCAM. The purpose of our program is to give our listeners and our viewers the experience of the very rich culture of poetry in the city of Philadelphia and the surrounding area. And we have a guest poet, artist, who has been very much a part of the culture of poetry in the city of Philadelphia, and that's Ditta Baron Hoeber. Ditta is an artist and a poet, trained as an artist at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts in Philadelphia. Ditta came to poetry on her own. Her poems have been published in several magazines, including Burning Word Literary Review, Noon, Journal of Short Poem, the American Journal of Poetry, Juxtaprose, Pank, Gargoyle, the American Poetry Review, Nth Position, and Contemporary American Voices. Ditta's work has been nominated for a Pushcart Prize, most recently her chapbook, Loss is Loss, was named winner of the Juxtaprose Chapbook Contest. Ditta's recent book, Without You, is forthcoming from Black Spring Press in London, England. Ditta's photographs, drawings, and book works have been exhibited throughout the United States and been acquired by several collections, including the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the University of Pennsylvania, the Museum of Modern Art, Franklin Furness Artist Book Collection, Shahagan School of Painting and Sculpture, Oberlin College, and Chelsea College of Art and Design in London, England. Recent exhibits of Ditta's work include Ditta Baron Hoeber Works, a selection of her handmade books from the collection at Swarthmore College in Swarthmore, Pennsylvania. Painted photographs at 57 West 57 Gallery in New York City, and writers making books at Arcadia University Art Gallery in Glenside, Pennsylvania. So, welcome, Ditta. Great to have you as part of Philly Loves Poetry. So, I read one of the poems in your collection, The Fugitive Photograph, and I just wanted to start and say this is a very different collection of poems in terms of structure of poems and organization of it. That perhaps maybe people aren't used to. I mean, people say, well, let me see a book of poetry. They're expecting everything, kind of be in stanzas and quatrains or tercets or some other structure. Your book is quite different, and it's interesting that I say it gives you so much space as the reader to experience it. I mean, some books of poetry, there's so much poetry there, you're scrambling and you're trying to figure out too much. or it's too much. This gives you a lot of space to breathe as a reader. And I think I said to you, I had the experience that I was looking at like a family photo album, and after that one little description, there's that space, and I as I was reading, I was thinking about maybe an experience in my own life that description or that poem was speaking to. So, can you tell us why you chose that particular structure for your book? And by the way, I want to show our readers. This is can you get that close? This is the cover of the book. It will be out hopefully by the end of the year.
Yeah.
So, well, back to my question.
Well, it's interesting because I sort of view the space as silence, and I don't. It's not a planned thing, but I think that what you're describing, that silence, allows you that room that you're talking about. I tend to do that with my artwork also. So it's hard to say why I do it. It's just in some ways instinctive. But and I tend to keep. I'm going to say this. The first poem I'm going to read is long, but generally the poems are short. And the form of the book is really a poem sequence. And I don't view them so much as individual poems, but as moments that intercut with each other, sometimes look like they're moving away and then it comes back, and
Yeah.
which I think is the way people think. Or maybe thinking isn't even the word, the way things run through your head,
Right.
whatever that is.
How much, I mean, you're an artist in a couple of different mediums, right? How much does one, well, you just mentioned a little bit, how much does, let's say, your photography inform your poems and your poems inform your photography? Some artists say, well, they don't. They're different.
They're different and they're not different. In some ways, my photography and the art that I make is very grounded in what's real. And the poems seem to me to all be like dreams. But then in other ways, the photography is dreamlike because what I see isn't strictly realistic. So yes and no.
Well, it's interesting you said about the dream because I didn't think of that until you just said it. You know that as you're reading through it, it has that dream-like quality or that reflection quality, and there's a feeling like you didn't just put this all together. That this work kind of stretched over a longer period of time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is work that, yes, it's over years. And the book is work that is probably 20 years old now.
Wow. The title of the book, Without You. And I'll deal with the without. But who is the you? Who do you want? Who are you? Because I don't feel it's, that we're talking about all about Ditta, but we are and we aren't.
The without you, it's more than one person.
Well, yeah, right.
There's not a simple answer, and maybe it's open-ended.
It's good.
Yeah, maybe it's open-ended.
One thing, and you just mentioned about, this space and the experience that I had, and in reading it, I talked about one level of experience. but it was the experience of absence. Okay, and subtraction of so much. Well, you have a poem in there. It's
Yeah.
called Subtraction
Yeah.
of so much, and it's kind of very bare and unadorned in many ways. Although the language is wonderful, it's crisp, but there's this feeling of absence, and I think said that to you. At a point, I was thinking of the poem by Wallace Stevens called "The Snowman," where he ends it. He said, "For the listener who listens in the snow, and nothing himself beholds, nothing that is not there, and the nothing that is." And I really get that. I really had that feeling or that reaction and that experience while I was reading your book. Is this absence, but there is something in these spaces that leaves the reader to do more. And is that purposeful, or am I on the right track in thinking that?
Well, you're on the right track because that's your track.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think about that more with my art, that someone is looking at it and they see what they see. I'm in a way creating a window, and you walk into that picture, and maybe it's the same in the writing. You always you see it your own way, and I think a piece of writing or a piece of art that is kind of a flat space. It says, this is what you're looking at,
Yeah.
and only this, is not satisfactory. It's not doing its job of being art.
In your poem Once, this is a line from that.
Once.
There is so much empty space in my imagination, as if things that happened only once.
Yeah.
That is a very wonderful line of poetry. Can you amplify that as far as a signature for other parts of this work?
I'm not sure I understand.
Well, this thing about the empty space and the subtraction and the absence
Oh, that's,
and your
I
imagination.
don't look at this from the outside, so you're making connections that I don't think about. Yeah, I guess I'm. It's the without. It's the without and without you. It's the without. It's without times. It's without any number of things.
And the child that is throughout this. The child is you, or the child is a child in the imagination, or another child, or children in general. The child is you.
It's Emily Dickinson said something about the supposed person. No, I can't remember it exactly. I
Right.
don't want to. I don't want to get Dickinson wrong, but it's me, and it's not me. It's an imaginary me. It's you when you're reading it.
Mm-hmm. Right. The other thing that I picked up on, and it was in certain as poems, but I call it like contrarian lines, things that were very surprising to read in a short piece. I'll give you an example. In the one poem, the child was a shadow. You describe that a child burned her hand, and you write, the burned hand throbbed like music. And a few poems later, and some time later, you describe a child had an illness which, at a crisis point, made blood vomit out of her mouth. But you end by stating, writing this calms me. I mean, to me, they're surprises.
They're surprises.
They're big surprises to the reader.
Oh, good.
And you're saying, why? To say that a burnt hand throbbed like music, can you give us a little more explanation for that and why that image was used?
That's what came out on the page.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, it's I did not go to school to learn to be a poet. I went to art school, and at some point I found myself writing poetry. Mm-hmm. The first group of poems that I wrote, and that was also a poem sequence. There were a lot of short poems, and I remember we had just moved into this house, and our bedroom was a big room, so I had my desk there. And the walls were a pale yellow. That was what was there when we moved in. And I was writing on the yellow legal tablets, and I taped the poems on the wall, the way I would tape drawings up. And because that's what I was used to, I guess. And I just found myself writing. And writing for me is something, some thought comes, some line, or half a line, or just a little image. And once you put it on the paper, you kind of keep going, and things keep attaching to it. And it's not as though it all magically happens. Then you look at it, you revise, you edit, you change it, you throw it out, you add things. But whatever it is, the story of it, the meaning of it, that seems to come with the writing itself, with the process.
Right. So you mentioned that you're, quote unquote, not a trained poet. I don't know what a trained poet. Somebody that's gone through an MFA.
Yeah,
program.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I think a lot of us that we're found poets ourselves. We found poetry.
Okay.
Or poetry found
Or
us.
poetry found us. Yeah.
But are there poets that you feel that have had a powerful influence on your perspective on poetry and writing poetry?
Someone asked me this once a long time ago, and I said, Shakespeare, Tom Waits, Emily Dickinson. I think of poets I like. The influence, when I said Shakespeare is an influence on everybody,
Right.
Whether you're a poet or not.
Mm-hmm.
Tom Waits, because, wow, where did that come from? Other poets, not directly. What I started doing. I mentioned to you earlier that I send out poetry in the morning to various people. I did that to teach myself about contemporary poetry, because I had never gone to school, and I didn't have, you go into a store, you see a lot of books, but you don't know which one to pick up unless somebody says, "Oh, this guy's good" or "she's good." So I would say that William Carlos Williams is a voice that makes sense to me. And he's wonderful when he's wonderful, and which is a lot of the time. I just started reading. I'm very bad at names. I forget the name of these. Cora and Hell. Yeah, they're difficult and they're very interesting. And I want to, I've just started looking at it. I want to look at it more.
Yeah, William Carlos Williams really set, poetry in a certain direction. I mean, I think he was fearless, in his approach to poetry, and poetry. What is it called? Patterson in New Jersey, and you read through some of that, and in a way you can get lost. I mean, the average person can get lost. You kind of slow down a bit, but you got to take it for what it is. I find like people try too hard sometimes to figure out poetry, and why not, let it just be
Yeah,
and find those pieces, of, well, it's like art. You can walk through a museum and you don't love everything, right?
right.
Or even from your favorite artist, you don't love everything, but there's something there that impacts the viewer or the reader or somebody watching something. But yeah, that's interesting. William Carlos Williams. Of course, he's also local, and a doctor. He was a doctor.
Yeah, yeah.
What is your hope as far as your book is coming out? What is your hope or your expectation of your reader? Or I don't know if you do have an expectation of your reader. If somebody say, "Well, Ditta, what should I expect from this? Why did you do this? What should I expect from it?" And how would you answer that?
I have to say that I don't think about the reader in terms of this is what I want from my reader. I want people to recognize something that I feel. I mean, writing it's about feelings,
Right.
and it's wonderful if somebody recognizes it. There's that bridge between you and the person reading, or you and the person listening, and that's then you're human.
Uh-huh. And the style that you use, which is this, very short. Well, you do have one long poem, which I love. Work.
Thank you.
I love that poem. It's much longer, and it is a very interesting poem, because that's another poem that set off in me so many things. And I think I told you on the phone. I read that, and it actually took me to a experience of a museum in Copenhagen, of a very contemporary art exhibit that had installations. And I've thought of that work as almost an installation of sorts. When you and I hope you read it, because
Yes, I know. I'm going to read it. Yeah.
it's a wonderful, wonderful poem. So it's that selection of, well, you have that long one, but there's this crisp, short, waste no language, that you did it the way you did it. As I say, with these short lines, maybe 3 lines, maybe 4 lines, and then there's space, and then we move on to the next poem. Although you have put it, you do have sections that
They're a
of the
little
book.
long.
Yeah. So why that?
Because that's the way I work.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's hard for me to write something long, although something like work just went on. And in a sense, they're all brief statements in it. And it's just that they keep going. I don't really like to read long poems by other people. Although recently I was reading something, I started reading it and it was long, and I thought, am I going to get through this? But the music was so wonderful, and that carried me along.
Mm-hmm.
I was surprised, and it was a lovely poem, but it was the music that did it. And I guess I only have short songs.
Uh-huh. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Also, you start the poem off with a child, and you end the poem with a child.
Mm-hmm.
And you start the poem off with essentially the birth, the coming of the child, and you end the book close to the end with the kind of prospect of death of this child. And I wondered about that. And can you explain?
There's a child,
Mm-hmm.
and there's an infant,
You're right.
and the infant dies.
Uh-huh.
At the end, I don't think there's death at the end. At the end, the child is, I wasn't going to read that tonight, but at the end, the child is, I can find it. She's folding paper. Should I read that?
Yeah.
The child remains the child remains the child. The child sits at the table folding paper. She runs a fingernail along each fold. It makes a small sound, but not noise enough to keep the child from thinking.
The other phenomenon that I had, because I did read things out loud, the poem I read to open the program, I felt that I was imposing a structure on it of stanzas to it. I mean, I really felt that I had to slow it down. It's almost like somebody comes out with a meal. And they said, "Well, this is all we have. I hope you can really savor it. I hope it, can fill you." So in reading it in that way, kind of visualizing it almost as a quatrain in a tercet in my mind, to slow it down to kind of savor, the movement of that. So it's that phenomenon that's in there. If one is sitting and reading it, if you're just sitting and reading it just to read it, and you're not really kind of in that, let's call it that mood for poetry, which is really savoring words and serving images, that's a different phenomenon. But as I was reading and read, I try to purposely slow down as I'm reading through. Maybe you had 3 lines there,
Mm-hmm.
but those 3 lines were broken away, and things jumped. Things moved differently from, let's say, it was almost like a stroke, and then another stroke, and another stroke, and another stroke. And I don't know if you did that. I don't know if you know that.
I leave spaces.
Yeah.
in part for the sound to me. I pause, I pause, I pause.
Right.
And then sometimes I write a long line and let it rush.
Uh-huh.
It's what sounds right to me, yeah.
Yeah. Well, what
And
sounds
sometimes the feeling also is what's creating this the sound.
so we've done a lot of talking about this. I
Okay.
think the proof of the pudding is in the eating. In this case, in the listening of you reading your work. So I'm going to turn the stage here over to you,
Okay.
and you can give our audience the experience of these poems that they can savor too.
Thank you. Okay. I'm going to say a little bit about the form of the book. It's in two parts. The first part is called the preface, and that is just a little collection of poems. It's not a poem sequence, they're just different poems. And they all are pieces that deal with the subject of the second part, which is a poem sequence, is really one long poem. So these touch on the subject matter or that material. And the second, as I said, is a poem sequence. When I read them, most of the poems in the book are titled. A couple aren't, and then I'll just say untitled. So then I'm just going to do it. Okay? All right. The first poem from the preface is called Work. A man alone in a room is taking cardboard boxes apart and making the pieces of cardboard into figures. I imagine him sitting the figures up, leaning them, propping them, then stopping and looking at them. I don't imagine that he speaks. Perhaps he sits next to one and leans into it, resting against its side, his imaginary friend. I imagine he takes its picture. I know he has taken its picture. Another day, he tears the figure apart. He takes it by the throat. He cuts its fastenings. Then he begins to build again, making one figure out of the detritus of another figure. Again, he arranges them. Perhaps he leans them toward each other, as if in conversation, and then watches them. Maybe he listens to them. Maybe he imagines that he listens to them. I know he takes their picture. I imagine he wonders if they want to take his picture. There is no furniture, so he sits on the floor with his camera, looking at them, sitting next to them. He is so close, he can smell their cardboard skin. He holds the camera for a cardboard figure, looks through the viewfinder to see what it would see, and then he takes the picture. One day a figure lies reclining on the floor as if an odalisque. He takes a picture. One day he takes a picture of nothing, of cardboard strewn across the floor. He has dismantled all his figures. I imagine he is lonely, but feels free. I imagine he sits for hours or maybe days and thinks, then makes another figure. The figures emerge and he finds that they are people that he didn't know he knew. He arranges them in a tableau, then moves away to study them. He uses the camera to study them, and after a long while, they come to seem familiar. And he becomes more relaxed with them. He imagines their conversations. He hums a little melody while he works. Sometimes he talks to them. But they can't answer him in words. They can only answer in his hands. Sometimes this feels like power, sometimes like mockery. Sometimes the closed circle that is his circumstance puts him in a rage. And then I imagine he takes a picture. Perhaps he imagines this is the only room in the world. How carefully he cuts away the tape that he had used to bind these silent figures. I imagine how mournfully and silently he carries out this work, cutting and cutting carefully. Now, all the cardboard is free, and he begins to build again. Untitled. Sabotage. Mama, Papa trip each other up and down before my very slightest irritation fills my eyes with blood. Blind, I hear the tendons tighten in my chest. At the butcher's counter, I watch the meat speak. Mama, Papa, sleeping tight. Study. I found a postcard, a photograph of a picnic, which said on the back, "What do you think of this? Look at me." In the photograph were 3 women, 4 small children, and 1 babe in arms. On the grass in front of them was a white cloth set with a bread, a pineapple surrounded by plums, 2 groups of spotty bananas, a quarter or so of a watermelon, and a bread knife with a wire handle. At one side of the picture, a child sat in the grass by its mother, holding a plum in both hands. At the other side, a child sat up in a carriage, bundled in a coat and blanket and wearing a ruffled bonnet. The others, more lightly dressed, were arranged in a semicircle between them. Everyone looked directly at the camera. The children, including the baby, each had a look that seemed to connect them to each other as well. This was true except for the child holding the plum. This child was nearest the camera, had an assertiveness, or seemed to have no awareness of anyone else, and thus his gaze had no second thought shadowing it. Both he and his mother almost spoke to the camera, and perhaps as a consequence moved just slightly, and so were just slightly out of focus. Everyone else was perfectly still. At nearly the center of the picture, a woman on her knees, with her arms wrapped around her at her waist, looked down and across at the woman and the child with the plum. Her head tilted slightly toward them, and her mouth was minutely pursed, as if she would momentarily speak. Her eyebrows had very pronounced peaks at the middle, like wide upside-down V's, and her face, underneath the quiet, was pretty. She was somewhat younger than the other women. Untitled. My father, excuse me. My father is blind. He has always been blind in one way. Now he is blind in another. If he cannot see me, has any tree fallen in any forest? I still love you, he says. What have I done that he should love me in spite of? My murders have only been murders in my mind. A story by Isaac Babel. I read my pop a story with a lot of Russian street names, most of which I stumbled over, and I laughed. He sat on the edge of the bed, his hands quietly folded as he listened. That was quite a mouthful, he said. Untitled. I see myself tossing this little package across the room to you. What's this, you say, and you open it, and you say, oh. That was from the preface. This is from the poem. The first chapter is titled Without You. Move a little bit. The infant dies. The infant's cry spells out some unendurable pain that will only be quieted by death, and the sound fills the house, and its tenants cringe at the sound. The child doesn't understand, or the child understands and wishes the infant would die. Simple as that. Kill the pitiless cry. The infant is removed to a hospital. The silence is a sob, then death stops it. Nothing is the thing that remains. Chill and multiple abandonments. The sound is gone. Emptiness nags. They try to fill it with music. The child will ever hate the clamor of music. If only they could have pulled her into the center of the sound, she might have found the pity. if she could have pressed her cheek against that cry. The child was a shadow. After they left, when they returned, the child was a shadow, afraid to be alone. When her mother went to put coal in the furnace, the child followed and burned her hand. The burned hand throbbed and throbbed like music. Then the little shadow had a friend. The child reads to the infant. Inside the center of that sound, I read to her, and she is quiet and seems to listen, and I discover that I am a hero. Then death undoes us. Then I am a hero with stones in my pockets. If she had stayed, would we be friends? The child watches, protected, held warm, comforted, and thus made fearful and ever hungry for comfort, forever unsafe. A mistake. The fruit is spoiled, the child is spoiled, throw her out. Start again. Too late. She speaks. She watches you. Some time later, the child cries, but her crying isn't loud enough, not good enough. Her pain is not pain enough. Why does all this come to me now? I thought it was all done, all known. The tears of the infant are sanctified with death. Can't beat that. Some time later, the child had an illness which at crisis point made blood vomit out her mouth. Writing this calms me. Little criminal. Little criminal wish for quiet. In the dark, curled tight. In the dark, in the night. Bony fingers crushed against the pubic bone. For the comfort, for the burn. For the burn brighter than, louder than the endless sound. Second chapter, photographs. Two little girls. A photograph, two little girls. One brushes the other's hair. Some other little girls. The child's face. The child's face could register pity, but she could not see her face, so she was uncertain. She could give things away, but that only told her she could tolerate deprivation. She could smile upon and stroke the head and touch the arm and laugh perfectly. Two photographs. In one, the child is in the garden wearing a raincoat, but there's no rain. Her hair is a little mop of curls. Her face is tilted up and smiling. Perhaps not in the picture, but in my mind, the edge of a net skirt falls below the raincoat, and she holds a wand with a silver star fixed to the end. The second photograph is taken at the circus. There is a distance between the child in the foreground and the figures at the back, so that the figures are seen only as gray or black shapes. The little girl is still. Her hair is more orderly in this photograph and darker. She faces the camera. A fugitive photograph. There was a picture, a woman in a coat moving out of the frame or with her back to the camera. A child also. The woman is pushing a baby carriage. There is nothing else, only some trees and some playground equipment in the distance. All around, the ground is covered with leaves. It is a fugitive picture. And there was a small white cardboard box in my mother's night table drawer. In it were a tiny pair of felt shoes and a little brush that had soft bristles and a sweet smell. Not long ago at my parents' house, I found a small box, and inside it was a medicine bottle. The bottle had the infant's name typewritten on its label and a date. I put it in my pocket. I look at her name. I look at her name typed out. I hadn't been sure how old I was. I look at the date. I was almost 5. It was a week before my birthday. She died the day before my birthday. The lights are off now. I can see that there are candles on the cake. Oh, the box measures 1 by 1 by 2 inches and has more weight in the hand than you would think. What's in it? A brown glass bottle. Oh. What does it mean how neatly the bottle fit into a box built for something else? The satisfaction of that reuse, the neat, the perfect fit, the hiddenness, something to steal from my father. Larchwood Avenue. The label on the bottle has so much information. The date, her name, the doctor's name. My mother mentioned that doctor repeatedly over the years. The name of the pharmacy, which awakens nothing in me, and the pharmacy address on Larchwood Avenue. I remember all the front yards in that part of the city, the rose bushes and ivy, and a tiny purple flower with a pointed yellow center, and iris leaning up against the iron fences. When I was small, I tripped once walking past those fences. I fell and cut my chin. The cut took stitches, but they weren't made well, so I still have the scar. But it is nothing, was nothing, not a fright, nor is the little medicine bottle a fright. No, finally, it is information. I unscrew the lid and look inside. The powder dusts the glass. I smell, and the smell is dusty, nothing. But I hold it in my hand, and this nothing is information. I hold it in my hand. For the child. Do you suppose they didn't take proper care of her? I want to put my finger into the medicine bottle, then lick my finger, but dare not. They sent her to the hospital to die, to restore the quiet. Her name. Her name is written on the label, the infant who died, my victim. I am afraid to say her name. If I give you her name, will you find it beautiful and want to turn away from me? Third chapter. I have no photograph of Donna. I have no photograph of Donna. I made a drawing once that was about her, but of course, not really of her. She watches. The child watches other children. She sings small songs, little fists of song, and she watches. The ugly duckling. Sitting by the window on the trolley, she sings to herself in her mind and thinks her song is beautiful. The small, unmusical child. She wants an audience.
Okay. Well, it was wonderful. Just reading straight through. So this completes our 8th season of Philly Loves Poetry. And like every season, this year we've had, phenomenal, remarkable poets, including you. It's a nice way to end. So this is another in the variety of poetry that Moonstone Art Center brings you. In addition to this, there's the readings at Fergie's Pub. There's dedicated readings to various issues that are happening in the world. So I ask you to go to moonstoneartcenter.org.com and to see the way you can support us for all that Moonstone Art Center has done for the cultural life of the city. So I thank you very much, Ditta.
Thank you, Charles. It's a pleasure.
Our final guest for this year. And I want to thank Sergio, as always, for his tremendous help in making this program possible. And I look forward to seeing everybody in the new year. I hope you have a great holiday.